Hey everyone, my name is Hannah Kraus, although you might recognize me better as this. It's really cool to finally meet you guys. Anyway, the poet I chose is Yehuda Amachai, and I have titled my video presentation thing, A Poet at Heart. Thanks for watching. In my life, there are many windows and many graves. Sometimes they exchange roles. Then a window is closed forever. Then by way of a gravestone, I can see very far. Yehuda Amachai, 1924 to 2000. Yehuda Amachai was a Jew, when the word Jew was something that often had to be hidden. Yehuda Amachai was a soldier, in a time when the word soldier was both adored and feared. Yehuda Amachai was a teacher in a time of social darkness, when the word teacher was looked on with suspicion as much as appreciation. More than anything, however, Yehuda Amachai was a poet much loved, who used his words to heal wounds and reshape nations. Yehuda Amachai was a man with many titles: Jew, soldier, teacher, poet. Each title he used with a purpose: to help others, to rebuild what was broken, and to change the world. Now, to begin, let's take a quick look at Yehuda Amachai's history. Yehuda Amachai was born in Würzburg, Germany in 1924. Würzburg was a decent-sized town about 500 kilometers, or 311 miles, away from Berlin, the soon-to-be capital of Hitler's Nazi nation. The Jewish Agency for Israel records Yehuda Amachai's family migrating to Jerusalem when he was 12 years old. It was there that he became an Israeli citizen. Now, time marched on, and as it did, so did the German soldiers. They left Germany in waves, attacking anybody who stood in their way. It was during this time that Yehuda Amachai took on a new title, that of soldier. At age 24, 12 years after moving to Israel, Yehuda Amachai joined the Jewish Brigade of the British Army. Now, he served at that time in what we now call World War II. The war had a huge impact on Yehuda Amachai and his poetry. There are tons of parallels in pretty much any poem you see. There are going to be references to war, its aftermath, the things he saw, the things that the people around him were dealing with. For example, one of his poems, In Yahav, the last few lines of it read, "And I said to myself, that's true. Hope needs to be like barbed wire to keep out despair. Hope must be a minefield." See, do you see that slight war reference there? Minefields, barbed wire. Those were the things that were left after World War II, all over his country. It's true that his poems aren't what you would consider war poems in the aspect of bloody battles and regret and guns and stuff, but there is a thread of reference. There are parallels in nearly all of his poems. Little things like comparing a relationship that he has with a city that's under attack. And I don't know if history repeats itself. Other poems such as Amen and Try to Remember Some Details also have references like this. Now, after the war, he became a student at the University of Jerusalem, where he studied biblical and Hebrew literature. It was during this time of studentness that he published his first poetry book, Now and in Other Days. It was a pretty good success, just saying. Now, after he graduated, he became a teacher. Woo! He was a professor. He taught in universities all over Israel, and some of them in America, including Yale. Pretty cool. So, by this point, he was a pretty popular poet. In fact, New York Times Magazine journalist Robert Adler stated that by the mid-1960s, Amachai was already regarded in many circles in Israel as the country's leading poet. Yeah, there were some who disliked his work, but according to the Poetry Foundation, Yehuda Amachai's poems have been translated into 40 languages. That's 40 languages. And entire volumes of his works have been published in English, French, German, Swedish, Spanish, and Catalan. I don't know what Catalan is, but it's a language, and they published an entire book of his in it. So there. One of the translators, Robert Adler, has said that Yehuda Amachai has been remarked with some justice as the most widely translated Hebrew poet since King David. King David of the Bible. Anyway, that's his basic history, so now let's look at some of the works that he wrote and what inspired them. Yehuda Amachai's interest in poetry began as, in a way that some people might consider by chance. See, while he was stationed in Egypt, he and a group of soldiers came upon an Egyptian library that had been just completely decimated. While they were poking around in the rubble, Yehuda Amachai found an anthology of modern British poetry. It contained the works of Dylan Thomas, T.S. Eliot, and W.H. Auden, just to name a few. Anyway, it was this book that really shaped his interest in poetry and caused him to become what would eventually be one of the greatest Israeli poets of all time. Now, the poems themselves, the poems that he writes are, well, they're interesting. The first thing that one should notice about his poems is that he didn't write in his native language of German. He actually wrote in Hebrew, which is pretty interesting because the language of Hebrew really doesn't have a whole lot of literature-based works in it. It's mostly a cultural and religious thing, especially in that time period, as so many people of the Israeli culture had dispersed from their land and moved all over the world. So that is something really important to point out. He actually coined a lot of phrases that are now really popular in the Hebrew language from his poetry. I can't tell you any of them because they're in Hebrew, and attempting to translate and or read them to you would probably kill me. But anyway, his poems have a kind of they're very simple poems. I mean, at first glance, he doesn't use crazy huge words. He doesn't use explosive vocabulary and just really technical terms and stuff. They're easy reads, but it's a misleading kind of easiness. You see, as you read his works, everything seems really straightforward, but the farther you get into it, the more the straightforwardness disappears, and all of a sudden words that you thought you knew the meaning to, you seem to find them with a double meaning, one that's completely opposite the first. See, in one of his poems, God Full of Mercy, he says, "If God was not full of mercy, mercy would have been in the world, not just in him." Man, think about that. See, the idea of God full of mercy is one of benevolence, but the way he words it, he almost seems like mercy is something that someone shouldn't have. Those few lines conjure up the idea of God, mercy, the world, and how all of those pertain. Whether it really is a gracious thing to keep mercy to oneself. They're crazy. His poems have threads of love, war, peace, regret, anger, and change. And they're relatable. Those are all things that the normal person goes through at one point or another. And yet, it's their relatableness that confuses you. Poetry Criticism, Volume 38, explains things pretty well when it says, Amachai's simplicity is deceptive. The poems are simple because he employs conversational inflection. Almost any poem begins with a certain forthrightness of statement. Yet, the more clearly the poet observes, the more inscrutable become the images he conjures, as his verse moves imperceptibly into the domain of incongruous, even the surreal. His poems are beautiful and oddly comforting, despite their thought-provokingness. Now, Yehuda Amachai's poems have earned him a lot of praise. He's received tons of awards, including but not limited to, the Shklovsky Prize, the Berner Prize, the Balak Prize, the Würzburg Prize of Culture, the Israeli Prize, the Argon Prize, the Malix Prize, the Literary Lion Award, Macedonia's Golden Wreath Award, the Norwegian Borskin Poetry Award, an honor citation from Alsat University of Egypt, and numerous honorary doctorates. Whew. Despite this rise to fame, however, Yehuda remained relatively humble. He denied the title of National Poet of Israel. "The reason a poet is a poet," he once said, "is to write poems, not to advertise himself as a poet." Which is pretty cool in my opinion, but, you know. Now, it wasn't only Yehuda's poems that made him a man worth knowing about. He was a huge advocate of peace, so much so that at one point he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, the peace that Yehuda wanted was not a spiritual peace. He didn't want to turn everyone Jewish. What he wanted was a peace where people of different religions could get along, where kids could play together regardless of their faith or their ethnicity. He wanted a peace where brothers could hang out with brothers regardless of what side of the government they worked for. And he used his poems as tools to further that. More than that, his poems really helped his people. See, after World War II, the Israeli people were having it pretty rough. There was this huge gap between identity and who they were, where they are now. It was a really awkward transition for a lot of the people of Israel. And Yehuda's poems really helped with that. They were something to unite the people with. He saw the pain, he saw the frustration, he saw the confusion and the problems, and he wrote his poems to help with it. In some ways, Yehuda Amachai and his poems are what shaped the nation of Israel and made it what it is today. At age 76, Yehuda Amachai died of cancer. He left behind a wife, 3 children, and a world of admirers. In his last publication, Open, Closed, Open, Yehuda wrote what many consider to be his epitaph. "All my life I played chess with myself and others. Now the pieces are all jumbled together. The game is calm and has no end, no winners, no losers. The hollow rules clang in the wind. I listen, and I am quiet, in my life and in my death." Amachai was truly a man of many titles, but his most monumental title was that of poet. He was awarded with nearly a dozen awards, and yet he maintained his humanity and his humility. Yehuda Amachai was a poet who loved peace, who fought for serenity, and at a glance understood an entire nation's dreams and fears. Yehuda Amachai was a hero, and though it's not likely he would ever call himself such, he will continue to be thought of as a hero for years to come. Anyway, that was my presentation. Thank you for watching. Bye.